and gentlemen of Nevada, please welcome the First Lady of the United States, who is here to lend her very credible and substantial diplomatic weight to the 1970 campaign of Mr. Bill Raggio for U.S. Senate. Mrs. Nixon is an accomplished ambassador and diplomat on behalf of the United States. She is an avid protector and advocate for the White House. She is a political advisor to the Commander-in-Chief and leader of our country. She is a friend to women and children throughout the world, all the while fulfilling her duties as daughter, sister, mother, and wife. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome our First Lady, Pat Nixon. Hey! Da, 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 da.
Hello, Nevada. You see me here today as Pat Nixon, the First Lady of the United States. But I have had many names and worn many hats, as you may say, throughout my life. I was born Thelma Catherine Ryan in a miner's shack in Ely, Nevada. But because I was born on March 16th, or the day before St. Patrick's Day, my father always called me his St. Patrick's Babe. From then on, I was dubbed Babe. And it was when I first started school in Artesia, California, that I was called Thelma. My classmates called me Buddy. At the time, my family owned a ranch, and I was responsible for many of the daily chores. I was the only girl, so I helped my mother with the household work. Unfortunately, my mother fell ill when I was only 13, so I had to take on all of the household work, caring for my father and two brothers, and nursing her as well. And if that wasn't bad enough, my father fell ill before I even graduated from high school. At the time, my brothers and I had to make a difficult decision. All three of us had scholarships for college, but we could only afford for one of us to go. We decided that Tom's future as an athlete was brighter than Bill's, so that he would take a football scholarship to USC, and Bill, as the oldest, would take responsibility for the ranch. Tom and I made an agreement that if I stayed and nursed our father, that someday, somehow, he would help me go to college. After my father passed away, I enrolled in Fullerton Junior College as Patricia Ryan. The name was a symbol of my new life, and I got Patricia from Patrick in St. Patrick's Babe. I worked at a bank as a bookkeeper and even as the janitor to support myself. However, I did not return to school the next year because I had the opportunity to travel with some family friends across the country to the East Coast and to New York City. While I was in New York, I worked at a tuberculosis hospital run by the Catholic Sisters of Charity, where my aunt, a nun, worked. It was also while I was in the East that I visited Washington, D.C. and the White House for the first time, where Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt were currently in residence. Finally, in the spring of 1934, Tom wrote and said that he had saved enough money for me to go to college in California. I graduated from USC cum laude in 1937. I partially supported myself in college by being a movie extra. I got to wear some truly beautiful costumes, and I was almost able to call myself actress, even though I only had one speaking part in the movie Becky Sharp in 1935. Unfortunately, my part was cut in the final edit. My next role was Miss Ryan, a typing, bookkeeping, and shorthand teacher in Whittier, California. I loved living in Whittier. It's beautiful with its orange, avocado, and olive groves, and the sweet scent of orange blossoms fills the air in spring. And it was also while I was teaching in Whittier that I decided to revisit a childhood passion of mine, acting. I auditioned for the part of Daphne Martin, a brat, in the play The Dark Tower in Whittier. The night I auditioned, I met Richard Nixon. He walked right up to me and said, "You may not believe this, but I'm going to marry you someday." And I suppose I didn't believe it that night, but I acquired my next title, Mrs. Nixon, on June 21st, 1940. Not long after Richard and I were married, he joined the Navy and went off to fight in World War II. We wrote to each other every day and kept in contact until he returned. When he finally did, we cut an ad advertising for candidates to run for Congress. Richard interviewed and was selected. We couldn't turn down an opportunity for public service, and it was our first political adventure together. We sunk every dime we had into the campaign and spent every waking moment working. We invested in color pamphlets and brochures to give out to the people. It was quite a devastating event for us when we found out that they were stolen from our campaign office. Also, during our campaign, I gave birth to our first child. Richard was at a campaign luncheon and broke the speed limit driving to the hospital. And I was sure that the baby I was having was a boy, so we had not discussed a girl's name. After 5 days in the hospital and the baby was still unnamed, Richard finally suggested Patricia, because he said it was my favorite name. Only a few weeks after that, we had to leave Tricia with Richard's mother to get back to the campaign. Fortunately, we won and headed off to Washington. When we first arrived there, we had a lot to learn about the etiquette in Washington. We were invited to a dinner party with informal dress, and I purchased a beautiful teal blue cocktail dress, and Richard wore his favorite navy blue suit. We were shocked to find that when we arrived, we were the only people not in tuxedos, black ties, or long formal gowns. As I later learned in Washington, informal means black tie and formal means white tie. Anyway, we spent 2 terms in the house, and I gave birth to our second child, Julie, in the first. And after those 2 terms, Richard decided that he would be able to accomplish more in the Senate. So we campaigned up and down the state of California in a second-hand wood-paneled station wagon. And by the midpoint in our campaign, we had traveled 10,000 miles, bringing our grassroots campaign to the people of California. It was a brutal campaign to live through, for Richard's opponent called him Pipsqueak, Pee-wee, and Tricky Dick. Fortunately, we won the election again, and Richard was now a senator. In 1952, there were rumors that Richard Nixon was a potential vice presidential candidate, since he was the youngest Republican member in the Senate. We didn't take these rumors seriously and went to the convention in Chicago in hot, steamy July to support General Dwight Eisenhower. When the papers predicted that the GOP ticket would be Eisenhower-Nixon, Richard sent an aide out to buy several copies so that he could show his grandchildren someday. I was very surprised to find, when I arrived back at our hotel that night, that Richard was waiting to discuss with me the possibility of the vice presidency. He told me that there comes a time in politics where you have to get up or get out. We decided to get up. We campaigned with the Eisenhowers in another intense campaign, but won a landslide victory carrying 39 states and 55.1% of the votes. My next title was Wife of the Vice President of the United States. After 8 successful years in the vice presidency, we decided to campaign for the presidency against John F. Kennedy in 1960. It was a terrible defeat and one of the closest presidential elections in U.S. history. We lost by less than 1/10 of 1%, and moved back to California and later to New York City. And while we enjoyed not being in the limelight, Richard still had more to accomplish as a politician. So we campaigned for the presidency again in 1968. Finally, I was First Lady of the United States. As First Lady, I have had many opportunities to travel all around the globe on diplomatic missions for the U.S. I have met many famous people such as Queen Elizabeth, Nikita Khrushchev, Charles de Gaulle, Princess Anne and Prince Charles, and many, many not so famous people. At home, I have been able to add proper outdoor lighting to the White House and paintings and antiques to it. In the vice presidency, I was able to travel to the Squaw Valley Winter Olympics and open them. They're not far from here. And I was able to listen in when Richard spoke with Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin after their moonwalk. I've also been able to use my position to encourage volunteerism, and I believe that everyone should give back to their community in any way that they can. Not all of my diplomatic missions have been chosen for me. Just a few months ago, I was at Camp David when I heard about the devastating earthquake that had hit Peru. I asked Richard, even though we aren't on good terms with Peru, if I could go. And before I knew it, I was on a plane to Lima, where I saw many, many tragic sights and over 800,000 people homeless. I tried to help in any way that I could. Whether I'm in Peru or anywhere else on the globe, I try to conform to my host's plans and customs, whether it includes sampling fresh goat's milk and honey or traveling to a snake farm. And there's so much more. But we're not here to talk about me today. We have come to support Mr. Bill Raggio for U.S. Senate. Mr. Raggio has Richard and I's full support and shares our strong passion for public service. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you Mr. Bill Raggio.